This is Akashvani. In the program Money Talk, now we bring you a discussion on Startup 20, shaping the future of the global startup ecosystem. The participants are Aashish Sinha, Joint Secretary, G20, and Aashish Sinha, journalist.
Namaskar. Startup 20, it appears to be a unique initiative under G20 meetings being organized in India. It started with inception meet at Hyderabad in January. Then it moved to Sikkim for Sikkim Sabha. Then we had Goa Sankalpana, and now the Shikhar Summit, the final one. To talk all about these things, we have with us Mr. Aashish Sinha, Joint Secretary, G20. Mr. Sinha, welcome to Akashvani.
Thank you very much, Aashish.
Mr. Sinha, what went behind this concept of a Startup 20? Because as a part of G20, we have so many other items, but talking about startups, what went behind that concept?
You know, it's a unique opportunity that India is hosting G20 as president. During our presidency, G20 allows us to set the agenda. We became ambitious while setting the agenda and defining the priorities. And we initiated one working group and one engagement group during our presidency. The working group is on disaster risk reduction and the engagement group is on Startup 20. So within G20 system, since there are already so many meetings covering almost all aspects under the Sherpa track and finance track and engagement groups, there's generally, we've seen reluctance in adding to the agenda. But the appeal of Startup 20 was so much that we didn't have much difficulty to get all countries on board to start a new engagement group in the name of Startup 20. There were some initial hiccups and some suggestions that why should it not be discussed under B20, which is Business 20. But, with our Indian experience, which has personally been given momentum by our Prime Minister, we've seen that startups are really doing very well. We have over 100 unicorns and over 90,000 startups, and they are adding to the economy. They are adding to the technological development, capacity building, employment generation. So we definitely thought that within B20 it can be discussed, but it should have its own personality and the deliberations could be specific to startup. It really deserves that the ecosystem and all other stakeholders be given specific attention. And that was the idea which we proposed. And we used some bit of diplomatic overtures to get all the G20 countries on board, which is a necessary requirement to start anything within this process. And that's how it started.
So you talked about over 90,000 startups in India and over 100 unicorns in India. If I take the G20 universe of a startup, that gives a number around 41,000 investors, 21,000 plus incubators, 750,000 startups, and 1,200 unicorns. So if I ask about the key takeaways from the final meeting which has concluded today, so what are the key takeaways from this entire journey?
Well, the three takeaways can be seen from the three priorities that we've set. When we started, we realized that we are starting almost with a blank slate in terms of international cooperation. Startups have been there for a while in different countries in different forms, but there hasn't been a clear understanding and a common understanding among G20 countries as to what would constitute a startup and what are their requirements. So we started with the definitional aspect, to define, not to strictly define, but at least to give definition to the extent that there is some broad common understanding as to what a startup is. So that is one takeaway. Then once we have some kind of a definitional clarity, it's important that alliances are built. Startup from one country speak to startup from the other country, and all other actors of the startup ecosystem of a country should know, identify, and have an engagement with their counterparts in other G20 countries and going beyond G20 countries to other developing countries as well. Because that's a necessary requirement for them to grow. One startup will get orders from other countries and the technology, the experience, the expertise. That's the only way for startups to grow fast and grow bigger. So that is second takeaway. And the third takeaway is financing requirements, financing and regulatory requirements, of course. We all want startups to do well, and to do well, we want them to be regulated, not by the government, but they should have their own regulatory system. So there was some discussion on that. And along with regulation, the financing requirement, because both go together. That is the third takeaway. And you would see that in the communique, the countries have expressed their wish that about $1 trillion investment should be made by 2030. So that's the kind of commitment which has come out of the discussion. About a percent of GDP or two of each of the G20 countries would possibly be required for startups' appetite to meet. These are the broad takeaways.
So it is not just a sharing of thought, but also promoting the business. That was the key idea behind this entire summit thing. Now, there is a task force policy communique. All these recommendations given in this communique, I believe they are going to be accepted. And what is the approach behind this particular communique?
Startup 20 is an engagement group. And the engagement group, by design of the G20 in architecture, they are supposed to be away from government and inclusive of all stakeholders. So within this process, all other stakeholders of startup system, ecosystem, got together and put their brains to come out with policy recommendations and their own commitments. Now, this has to continue. The discussion has to continue. And we are hopeful that in the subsequent presidencies of Brazil and South Africa, the startup will get similar attention or even more attention that it has got during our presidency. So the discussion continues and a narrative is built. And this is how policies are made and governments are influenced. And finally, tangible results come on the ground. This is how all the recommendations are listed in each of the three takeaway areas that I've mentioned. Task forces met, they discussed, and they have come out with policy recommendations in each of the areas and the sub-areas.
And will these recommendations be part of the final communique which is going to be issued in the month of September after the Leadership Summit?
Engagement groups come out with communique, not all. There are about 11 engagement groups and they all have different traditions. So some of them come out with communique. Not all communiques go into the leaders' declaration because leaders' declaration are broadly government to government discussion and what governments are supposed to do. Engagement groups have been kept away and engagement groups keep discussing from one presidency to another and they build the narrative because not all recommendations matter to government. Some of them, for example, self-regulation is a recommendation which startups have to implement among themselves or within their ecosystem. So all these recommendations per se will not go to the leaders' communique, yet it will be presented to the respective leader, the host ministry, in this case DPIIT, and part of it, whatever it is deemed fit, will go in the communique directly. And certainly there will be recognition of constitution of such a group in the main communique.
One of the topic is of the Sikar Summit is paving way for $1 trillion investment by 2030. Will it be just a government investment or will it be a public-private investment? That means more investment from private sector also?
No, it is not defined or restricted to governmental investment. I think it should be from all possible sources.
Okay. One other area which was part of this summit was the trailblazers of tomorrow, schools to startup. What is the key thinking behind this topic?
Idea is to catch them young, as with anything. If you catch them young, of course, they are groomed better. And entrepreneurship has been generally in our country, people have been less entrepreneurial, less risk-taking, except for few. So now with advent of technology, you don't have to be coming from a business background or entrepreneurial background. One could be an entrepreneur in his or her individual right. So it's a good idea to introduce the youngsters from school itself. And they already have ideas. So to help them build on their own ideas, it's important that they are engaged and they are groomed and their ideas are listened to and handheld to further grow. With this idea, the schools were integrated in this process and it was taken very, very warmly. The students were very enthusiastic, so was the audience. And we hope, they are the leaders of tomorrow, they are the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. And, they are Elon Musk and Narayan Murthy's of tomorrow.
And another interesting topic during this summit is the passing on the torch, which is just before the valedictory. So what kind of message of this particular session? What are the thinking behind this session?
The next year's presidency, starting December 1st, 2023, would be of Brazil and subsequently it will be with South Africa starting 2024 December. This is a very unique moment in G20's journey when 4 successive developing countries are holding presidencies. Before us, it was Indonesia, and after us, it will be Brazil and South Africa. So, along with the presidency, engagement group's chair will also be Brazil. Now, the success of our effort will be in great measure viewed by its continuity. And Brazil has agreed to continue this as a standalone engagement group as we have started. And that itself shows how important it has been found by all these countries. Brazil and South Africa being developing countries, they will bring the ideas of developing countries, the necessities of developing countries in terms of startup energy to be channeled and funds to be channeled. So that is the idea of handing over the torch. And last night in the drone show, along with Indian map, Brazilian map was also shown. So it's a collective effort. And one presidency is not enough for getting the concrete results on the ground. So success of our presidency and whatever we have done will come to fruition only if it continues. So the idea is to celebrate the continuation, and that is why handing over the torch.
So if I understand correctly, that the concept of startup can also be part of the G20 meetings under the Brazil presidency. If I understand correctly, it could be part of that.
It will be part of that since we are handing over and they are taking over. So it means that there is a commitment by Brazil that Startup 20 will be a part of Brazilian presidency as a standalone engagement group.
Now coming to the final part of our discussion, that is about this recovery after pandemic, and also we are seeing some kind of geopolitical tension in terms of war in one particular region. How this is impacting the startup ecosystem? Was there any discussion on this issue also, and what kind of solution were there after the discussion?
That's a very good question. Yes, pandemic and related crisis has only strengthened the startup and resolve of the promoters of startup. It has not reduced. Pandemic was not just an economic crisis, but it was also a socio-cultural crisis kind. But you see, startups rose to the occasion. Most of the companies in the value chain of vaccine manufacturing or PPE were startups. They never existed before. Most of the platform, we are talking over the Zoom platform or WebEx platform or such meeting platforms. They came into life only during COVID. Many of the remote educational platform, online educational platform came into being during pandemic. So startups are a solution for every crisis. In each possible crisis, the way to handle crisis comes from such startups, which are nimble-footed, which are innovative, and which have the resolve to address the crisis to be helpful to the society. So it has really been useful to have startups during this time. Going forward, the world has realized the value, and the bigger corporations have also benefited. As against, it's not a binary between big corporations versus startups. Actually, both are together. And startups are being promoted by big corporations to take care of their requirements of research, of innovation, of value additions. So the future looks quite bright from here on for the startups in terms of being a part of global value chain, in terms of addressing the healthcare issues, in terms of addressing the educational issues, and more so in the global south, where some of these problems have existed, and in a conventional way, the solution will be very late and not enough. So startup innovations are important for providing basic public goods to developing countries. That way, the value is realized, and we are hopeful that it will be continued.
Mr. Sinha, thank you very much for talking to Aakash.
Thank you very much for having me.
You were listening to a discussion on Startup 20, shaping the future of the global startup ecosystem. The participants were Aashish Sinha Joint Secretary, G20, and Aashish Sinha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Aakashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 928-909-4044.